Welcome, everyone. And thank you for joining us for this call. I'm Frances Stewart. I'm the chair of the Education Committee for Elders Climate Action. Some of you might be new to the ECA. Just to give you a little bit of background, we are the elders, including grandparents, great aunts, and great uncles, and folks who care about the future for all children. As ECA members, we are determined to do all we can to leave a sustainable planet for future generations. Our programs, communications, and chapters seek to inform, inspire, and engage others across generations to take action on the climate crisis on the local, state, and national levels. ECA is elder-centered and volunteer-driven. You can learn more about us or get more involved at eldersclimateaction.org. Now, to give you an idea about this call, it's going to be an hour-long presentation. We'll have 3 speakers and then a brief reflection from each speaker, followed by Q&A. So please leave your questions for our speakers in the Q&A box. We have an amazing panel tonight. All of our guests tonight were on the ground in Dubai for COP28, and they're joining us tonight to share their insights and their takeaways from those events. Reverend Susannah Tuttle from North Carolina, Interfaith Power and Light, is a friend and ally of Elders Climate Action. She's the director of the North Carolina Council of Churches Eco-Justice Connection Program. The primary campaign of that program is North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light, addressing the issues and impacts of climate change as a moral imperative. Susannah is a founding member of the Southeast Faith Leaders Network and is an active member of the U.S. Climate Action Network. She currently serves on the executive board of the Southeast Climate and Energy Network and is the community liaison for the U.S. Fair Share Collaborative and is a founding member, along with Elders Climate Action, of the Breathe Again Collaborative. Myra L. Jackson is the founder of the Global Freshwater Summit, which is an initiative of the Global Being Foundation. Myra is an ECA member and a longtime contributor to our education committee. She's enjoyed a diverse array of hefty careers as an electrical engineer, an organizational development professional, a systems thinker, and a master trainer. She fully retired at the age of 48 to actualize her own inner and outer peace with the environment and work on behalf of the restoration of people and planet in harmony with nature. Her spiritual path deepened with travel into remote areas of the earth and living abroad, where an opportunity to represent 88 NGOs as a focal point during the Rio+20 summit brought her to Brazil and into a formal relationship with the UN system. Myra served on the UN Open Working Group on the Sustainable Development Goals from March 2013 to July 2015 and led efforts to communicate the 17 Sustainable Development Goals from the global to the local in her role as UN representative and focal point on climate change and rights of nature with the Earth Law Center. She's a senior advisor on Whole Earth Civics and a UNFCCC delegate since 2014. And she serves on the UN Harmony with Nature Expert Platform. In 2021, Myra convened the Global Freshwater Summit. In December 2021, she joined the board of the Commons for Real Earth Metrics, a national and local governmental agencies in decision-making. Myra is currently the Mindfulness Fellow and visiting instructor on sustainability in the Anthropocene at Colorado College. With COP28 as her 16th UN climate change meeting, Myra traveled to COP27 and 28 with a cohort of Colorado College students, along with students from 10 other institutions of higher learning. In an aspirational way, Myra carries the title of Diplomat of the Biosphere, given by the Stockholm Resilience Center, and speaks internationally on the Sustainable Development Goals, climate change, and the rights of nature. She invites all of us to listen to the Earth in a way that ensures a healthy living biosphere. Our third speaker is Joseph Robertson. He is Citizens Climate International Executive Director and a Citizens Climate Education's Global Strategy Director. He does policy analysis, coordinates strategy to train and empower volunteers, and develops new groups abroad. He leads CCE's engagement with the United Nations, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition, and other multilateral institutions. Joe also leads the Citizens Climate Engagement Network, a global organizing project from Citizens Climate Lobby and Citizens Climate Education, supported by an advisory coalition of partner organizations aimed at expanding the global civic space for effective climate policy. He is the founder of geoversive.net and the Geoversive Foundation, and he's the lead strategist supporting the high-level climate dialogue series, Accelerating Progress, Advancing Innovation. Joe is the author of the book, Building a Green Economy, on the economics of carbon pricing and the transition to clean, renewable fuels, and a member of the executive board of the NGO Committee on Sustainable Development, New York. So we've got a great panel. I'd like to take it away.
Okay, well, hi everyone. I think because my bio was read first, I'll go first. And I have to say, in the presence of these greats, I'm glad I get to go first. So it's a real pleasure to be with you all this evening, and an honor to get to work alongside Elders Climate Action and many campaigns, especially the Breathe Again Collaborative, of which we're co-founding partners. So I am going to start off, and thank you for the bio overview. Again, my name is Susannah Tuttle. I use she, her pronouns, and I live in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I have been the director of the Interfaith Power and Light and Eco Justice Connection program since 2011. So I've been doing this work for a long time with communities of faith and people of conscience to address the climate emergency here on the domestic side of U.S. Engagement policy actions that we can take as advocates and to care for God's creation. So I'm honored to lead through the lens of faith through that work. And then just briefly as how I got into working in a more international way through international solidarity campaigns was through my work in partnership again with ECA. And it was at a 2019 U.S. Climate Action Network annual meeting, where for the very first time I was presented at the opening plenary of the conference, a concept that was focused around global equitable climate finance. And as someone who has been working, again, with helping congregations become more energy efficient and look to renewable energy, trying to have those hard conversations about money, which we all have trouble doing, and especially in the nonprofit sector, I connected the dots, or like to say I like to do puzzles. So I felt like I had a whole entire outline of the puzzle, the corners and the edges and these piles of different colors all around on the side. And I didn't have a picture of the cover of the box. And so I didn't actually know what I was trying to create in this puzzle in my many decades in working on climate justice and climate action here in the US, until I learned about global equitable climate finance and realized that as people of faith and conscience, we are called to do our fair share and to really understand what that fair share is. And that's what brought me to getting involved in the UNFCCC. And then for between 2019 and then, of course, during the pandemic years, I really served as on-the-ground support for folks that did go to Glasgow and to previous COPs, because when you're over at a COP in a different country and you're working on different hours and such, it's really important, at least for me and for my colleagues, to have people in the US that you're communicating with back so that they can be communicating with our fellow citizens and colleagues and friends and neighbors here back at home while all of this is happening. So that's what I used to do once I learned about all of this. And then I did attend Egypt for the very first time last year. And then since the theme of tonight is to talk about COP28, I thought what I would do is just talk a little bit about what my experience was. And then I'm happy to go into and do more education and overview opportunities about the United Nations and how all the COPs work from inside out. And Joseph and Myra might speak directly to that. So for me, as someone who works supposedly in North Carolina, but has fallen in love, and my personal and passion ministry is now international solidarity, and what that means around a fair shares framework. So when you think about global equitable climate finance and you think about what it means to think about every single monetized aspect of what happens on planet Earth within the global economy as a kind of climate finance, that would really get us to the actual magnitudes of money that we need to address the crisis at scale. And so when the Paris Agreement took place, I met, and these people that gave the presentation that I mentioned earlier in 2019, I got to meet these folk that were there when the Paris Agreement took place, that went to the United Nations and said, we'd like to do a fair shares analysis of all of the different countries' contributions, of what the pledges that they're making, and how that all, back to that pieces of the puzzle, if every country is a puzzle, what does that mean if you try to put it all together, and does it actually get us to the pledge of the Paris Agreement? And so these very smart people that had the methodology and wanted to do this study proposed this to the United Nations, and the United States nation said, no, thank you. We would not like to pit all of the countries' pledges against each other. We are so happy with the Paris Agreement. Let's see how this plays out over the course of time. I will say, with perfect hindsight, had they allowed them to do that study up front, we might be closer to where we need to be now. That's all looking back. So looking forward, this COP28 was really in a very exciting time. And again, Joseph and Myra can probably speak much more to this, to the details of how we got there. But I had to prepare by focusing on the global stocktake. So learning what the global stocktake was, for me, was my homework to get ready for this COP. And it was as simple as me understanding we're all going to take stock of what the global pledges are. And there's going to be a report that comes out, and it's going to tell us how close we are to the goals that we set through the Paris Agreement. And so people correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the simple version of how I understood we were going into COP28. I also was really excited because, as an advocate and working with all of the, our fellow colleagues coming over from US Climate Action Network, and I wore a Southeast Climate and Energy Network badge as a board member, and was there with other members of our regional network of the US network. And again, for those of you that might be newer to US or maybe you hear about it all the time from ECA, but US Climate Action Network is the civil society NGO advocacy group of the United States. We're the US node of CAN International. So there's all these CANs, climate action networks, all over the world. And we're very active in the US-based one because we're from the US. So long story short, and I'll probably wrap this up sooner and be more about sharing resource links, but we had come out of our preparation and understanding the global stocktake, those very same folks that wanted to do a US or a fair shares analysis of the Paris Agreement ended up doing it for the United States, and were able to come up with a statement of what the US climate fair share actually is relative to historical responsibility, so historical emissions, our capacity to pay, we're the richest country in the history of the world, and our moral obligation. We are a democracy. We want to do good in the world. We do all sorts of things around the world. Why don't we also want to do our fair share in addressing the climate crisis at scale? So those are the principles of fair share. I can give whole presentations on fair share. I'm going to link to our website. But the US Climate Action Network, comprised of over 185 organizations, all agreed on one statement that US endorsed. And so it was my job as a US Fair Share liaison, community liaison, I lead that work here in the US, to bring that statement into COP28. And so what we did was we, first of all, wrote an article called Why Historical Responsibility Could Make or Break COP28, and put it on our website. And so this gave people a background, including the people that we were trying to influence in the negotiation team for the US through the State Department. We wanted to make sure they understood why historical responsibility matters. And then the first day of the second week of COP, we did a press release with the hundreds of organizations and then thousands of people that signed on as individual supporters of demanding that the Biden administration do its fair share for climate action at COP28. And I want everyone to just understand this is a very broad ask. And it's very values based. What we were asking for in the global stock take is that there was some sort of baseline set of values that could be inarguable as far as what we're trying to accomplish, so that when you get into a negotiation space, you can begin to all enter into the room with the same end goal. That same end goal is supposed to be to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement, but we need something as a foundational value set as to why folks are going to do what it is we need to do. And from my years of studying and doing this work, I believe the fair shares approach is the only way that we are going to meet the crisis at scale. So we did the press release. You have the link there. You're going to get all these links from ECA tomorrow with the recording. Here is the letter that implores the Biden administration to do its fair share. That's the actual letter that folks signed on to. And then on the very last days of the COP28, when many of you might have seen in the news, activists, advocates, organizers from all over the world were chanting "hold the line," because we really were not going to accept where we were getting in the fact that the demand was to be able to, I mean, first and foremost, to be able to have fossil fuels as words in the negotiation space was a huge success. And the fact that there was real pushback from countries like our own to use language of fossil fuel phase out was really a struggle, and continues to be so now that we're back at home. So we did release, I think it was the night before, or the 48 hours, within 48 hours of the closing of COP, we released again what it was that we were asking for from a fair shares framework, and fighting for a realistic agreement at COP. And I would just say that, again, what we come around back to is that we need to stop talking not only about what is possible, but to start acting on what is actually needed. And again, I'll be soon turn this over to my colleagues here who are going to have so much more experience than I do, but some additional resources around fair shares, if this indeed is something that you're interested in learning more about. I hope you are, and I'll put my information in the chat, or it'll be included in the recording, is that when President Biden was elected, we a team of people working on fair shares around the world, and particularly those organizations based in the US, drafted what a fair share nationally determined contribution should be, using the methodology that has been universally agreed upon by people that understand it, and presented it to John Kerry, Special Envoy previously. Now I'm curious what'll happen, and Gina McCarthy. So the Biden administration is aware of what our fair share is, and unfortunately the political constraints in the US are making it impossible to lead with it. And so we're at a place now where the conversation is, how does the administration support those of us that get it, because they get it, and find other ways to develop blended finance opportunities for investment, through not just thinking that the government is going to magically wave a wand and it's all going to work. Essentially, my takeaway, I guess, is that COP is broken and the governments are really struggling, and that as I've learned about the different pillars of the UNFCCC and how the United Nations works, I'll be going to the Commission on Study of Women in New York in a couple of weeks in March. There's a lot of different moving parts of the UN. We know that. But this particular space within the climate negotiations, having the locations that they're picking, the fact that they just announced that there are no women on the Azerbaijan, planning team. I mean, there's just a lot not going right. And so to take a big breath, I'm a person of faith, to step back and to say, okay, this isn't working. I need to pivot strategy wise. And let me listen to the people that are telling me, we're not going to do what you're asking us to do. And then for me to be able to say, okay, if not, why not? And then how can we work together to develop a different strategy? So that's where I'm at in the Fair Shares campaign, is to think about ourselves as, and I remind everyone that you have government, you have the private sector, business, and then you have civil society. Every single human being that is a member of government and a member of representing whatever they're representing, whatever company they're representing, they're all members of civil society. We are one family. We are one humanity. We can figure this out. We can do this together. We just need to really design that practice of unity, because this is not working. And I'll let the others tell you what didn't work. Or maybe they think some things did work, because some people are saying this is a very successful COP. And there are reasons why, but in the scale of the magnitude of the problem, I would say that I'm very, very disappointed. I will not be attending next year, but I'm getting ready for COP30 in Brazil in 2025, because that is when the next round of nationally determined contributions will be putting forth. And so our time in the US right now is to really educate ourselves about what it is, not only what is possible, but what is needed. And our NDCs need to be delivered between November and February. And we happen to have a huge election going on during this time. So this is our time. And I believe, and it's just an amazing journey. And I encourage everyone to practice the art of international solidarity. And we all know that all climate action is local. So thanks again for letting me share all of that. I really appreciate you all, and I'll turn it over to Myra. I think you were next.
Thank you. I want to just check the time because I know I planned for 10 and I think I can get this down to 8. I want to make sure we have ample time for Joe. He's my go-to always in debriefing and summarizing the COP experience. But I'm going to go ahead and bring up my slides because I have a particular lens that I'd like to speak to the COP experience this round. And it has to do with my focus on the MENA. The next Global Freshwater Summit will actually be held in the Tigris, and it will be focused on the Tigris and Euphrates, and it will be held in Iraq. And so my paying attention to the MENA region is informing this presentation today. And again, I'm going to try to really keep that short and tight so we can get to Joe and to audience questions. This is a map of basically the idea of global north and global south. As I've been paying attention to the MENA region has been involved in a process of joining the BRICS. And here's a flag of the countries involved in the BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And as we proceeded into the year, before we were heading into our intersessional work in Bonn, there was an announcement made that several countries, and many of this began to occur after Sharm el-Sheikh, COP27, were asking to join the BRICS. And so there was a meeting of foreign ministers in August, and during that time, formal invitations were given to really 7 emerging market group countries. Argentina was originally a part of that, and it was formalized on January 1st of 2024. So here's what we have today in the MENA is, and actually I'm looking for my slide there, but I think I left it out. What we have now is the BRICS plus 6 new countries: Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. And so this was really an interesting moment for me because the MENA group, the Middle East, North African region, was convening their own climate week on October 8th, 2023. Now, I hope that October 8th is registering what was going on in the wider expanse of the geopolitical landscape. Because as they were meeting in Riyadh, the attack had begun. That is now the war in Israel. And the timing of this coming on the heels of the joining of many of the MENA region countries into this bloc called the BRICS was really notable, because I had been attending the meetings in advance of that, many of the meetings amongst the MENA group, and they saw themselves as a bridge between the global North and global South. They felt the BRICS as an international order would fail without a bridge maker between the countries, that these multi-polarity countries that don't see eye to eye, that were currently a part of the BRICS. And so I began to watch these events unfold, the war, our concern as we're heading into the COP as to whether or not it would be canceled due to war, if there was outbreak more widely in the region. And I began to cast my bet that the Emiratis would figure out how to keep the region stable, because their goals depend on a stable Middle East. In the midst of all this, China brokered a deal that was around the same timing as Hezbollah was engaged briefly in the attack, to reconcile parties around the nuclear deal. And that was largely unreported in the US. But because I'm watching the region, I made note of this. So that put my attention squarely on how would the Emiratis, given this role in COP as the presidency, how would they host this event? How would they hold the region stable? And how would they come out of this with a reputation for being that bridge between the global North and the global South? Well, a couple of things happen. And again, I'm checking my time because I don't want to go over, honestly. But a few things to point out is that this host did their homework. I was aware that they had begun reaching out to civil society groups a year and a half before the COP, learning who the NGOs were, who the civil society actors were. And they invested time and energy. They had folks coming into Dubai, visiting the old town centers, getting acquainted. They invested in youth like we've not seen in the past, forming several organizations around youth leadership and paying for them to be in meetings so that they would not just have a youth day, but that youth would have a chance to engage and build capacity for being leaders in these spaces. They came out early, day one, with a deal on loss and damages, which shut down debate on loss and damages and galvanized the energy that was all reared up to go in that direction into the direction that we ended up. There was great care on the details. There was a lot of upset out of prior COPs, including Egypt, on all manner of things. And this presidency took care of the small details as well as the large, including handling Putin's objection to who would host the next COP, as Putin was flown in and deals were made to get that handled. They had a zeal for solving difficult challenges that were impressive. I would stay in rooms and negotiating rooms to 1 and 2 in the morning, and their zeal was evident. They were rolling up their sleeves. They were getting the work done. And this investment, I feel, in the youth is one to really, really watch. I think it was paying off already before leaving altogether. On a side note, the civil society expression of support for Palestine and the fossil fuel phase out was given quite a bit of space at the COP. Here's a photograph of youth. There's so much that can be said. The other little move that was pulled out, I guess was not little or large, was the Majlis, which was the gathering of foreign ministers in the room to have a heart-to-heart talk with Al-Jaber, the Sultan, the presidency. And this came after there was quite a divide in negotiations. And this was very similar to an approach of what we have had by Fiji, to bring parties together, to build empathy, to listen, and to galvanize energy in that way. But here's the deal. The turn toward the transition has an interesting trajectory in terms of COPs overall. And that has to do with the mentions of the word fossil fuel in the IISD's summary, which is, this is an organization that we rely upon to keep track of the daily events and to summarize those events, not only daily, but at the end. And these documents run, the summaries, about 28,000 words or more. And tracking that over time shows that for the longest time, the OPEC nations were very effective in blocking fossil fuel language in these negotiations. And we went from 1 to 46. In the closeout of this particular COP, there were 46 mentions of fossil fuel in the summary. And that went from way back when the meeting was hosted. It was 2012. It would have been COP18 in Qatar. There was only one mention. Now, in 1992, when the convention was created, there was a mention of fossil fuels, but we really went almost 20 years without any real mention of fossil fuels until the OPEC nations got rattled with what happened in Poland as the meeting was hosted there. I won't go into that in any great detail, but I will come to here to say that like-minded nations are keeping an eye on the gaps between the outcome of transition toward the drawdown of fossil fuels and the actualities. And this is what we all need to pay attention to. The fossil fuel profits are up from $1.5 trillion to hitting this high of $15 trillion in profits in 2022, which led to this increase. It was $4 trillion in 2022 and expected to be, after the numbers are all settled, $15 trillion for 2023. And what we've seen is in many of the goals, a stated increase in production goals. And that is our challenge, is that what is said is one thing and what we do is another. So getting back to the words that Reverend Susannah shared, and I'm sure that Joseph will go further into as he lays out, here's what we've got. These are the countries who have real plans to increase production in these areas and those who don't. And at the state that we're in terms of where we are with fossil fuels, it's really time for all of us to take stock, not just a global stock take, but a stock take where we are in our communities and in the organizations that we're a part of and in our lives. And I love that that's what ECA is supporting this night. And so I want to turn this quickly over to Joe so we give him maximum time and that we can hear from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Myra. And it's two wonderful presentations and a wide diversity of issues already on the table. So I'll try to be brief, just kind of running through some of the issues on the table at COP. Right in October, there was a new State of the Climate report released, and many of you may have seen it, but there's a particular paragraph that has really stuck with me, and I've tried to bring it into a lot of the conversations that I've been in. And this is what it says. By the end of this century, an estimated 3 to 6 billion individuals, approximately 1/3 to 1/2 of the global population at that time, might find themselves confined beyond the livable region, encountering severe heat, limited food availability, and elevated mortality rates because of the effects of climate change. 3 to 6 billion individuals confined beyond the region. So first of all, think about that. The planet will have a livable region and everything else. We're not used to that. Nothing in human society is prepared for such a circumstance. When we talk about, issues around borders, immigration, most of the countries that are screaming and yelling about the intolerable amount of newcomers that they're dealing with are dealing with a tiny, tiny fraction of the people who will be on the move. And that's considering that now and probably in the future, usually it's less than 10% of all people who've been forced to leave their homes ever cross a border. So I just want to, this is the context we're in. We are way past the point where climate change is a future concern. The difference between now, where climate change is an everyday reality, costing hundreds of billions of dollars a year, and that future where part of the world is no longer livable at all. That's the space we're in. Now, before the COP, we had a series of workshops to prepare people, and the insights that were clearly there on the table were, and relating to the global stocktake, nationally determined contributions will need to be upgraded. Costs of adaptation are accelerating everywhere. The majority of the least developed countries are facing deep debt distress. As many as 90 countries are in a kind of state of chronic near debt distress. Operational tools, systems, standards, and incentives are needed, not just words. Involuntary displacement due to climate change impacts is accelerating across the world, including inside of wealthy Western countries. And finance is the Achilles heel of many convention processes. And that's partly because some people, when they hear finance, what they think is money. Someone will give money to someone else. But of course, finance doesn't work that way. Finance hands you money for a time and expects more in return. But I want to just highlight that a lot of the things that I'm about to share come from an effort that has similar roots to what Susannah mentioned earlier, which is this idea that climate finance really should be every penny. In 2015, at the Climate Finance Day in Paris, on the way to the Paris conference that agreed the Paris Agreement, Christiana Figueres, who was at the time the executive secretary of the UN Climate Secretariat, told central bank governors, finance ministers, and corporate CEOs, when we talk about climate finance, we should be talking about a world where no money generates climate damage anymore. And of course, all of these powerful people were stunned into silence because they had just never envisioned something on that scale. But obviously, that's what has to happen eventually. Finance is the Achilles heel because people don't seem to be able to get their minds around that idea and aren't ready to mobilize the money. So what was in the UAE consensus? That's what they called the outcome. And that, unfortunately, is somewhat questionable because, as many of you may know, immediately after the COP president announced they had reached consensus and named the document the UAE consensus, the first country to speak, Samoa, pointed out that the small island countries had been excluded from the final discussions and had not had a chance to voice their objections before the gavel fell, citing no objections. So I say that partly because there are good things in the agreement, and a lot of what Myra said is true. Well, all of what Myra said is true, but when you look at the whole story, the only way that an agreement made in that fashion can ultimately be legitimate is if its goals are implemented. And so there's more pressure now, I would say, to achieve implementation in a meaningful way than there has ever been before. Now, the document recognizes that Paris goals are, progress is moving too slowly. We need to accelerate the action towards transformation. It recognized the need to transition away from fossil fuels in energy system, and there's some other caveat language there. It also recognized, quote, the importance of ensuring the integrity of all ecosystems, including in forests, the ocean, mountains, and the cryosphere, which is why I have this image behind me, because To preserve ecosystems in the cryosphere means to preserve the cryosphere, which means to stop melting, which means to stop global warming. This is a more ambitious goal than any goal agreed since the convention, which mandated that we all work together to prevent dangerous climate change. It's a much more ambitious goal than 1.5. We can hold global warming to 1.5. We will not preserve the existing cryosphere. It will continue to melt at 1.5. And all of this must happen in line with the science. Well, there's a lot of disagreement about what the science means. The sixth assessment report from the IPCC says that we're likely to breach 1.5 before 2040. So net zero by 2050 is not in line with the science. It also says that beyond 1.5, certain critical structural elements of the climate system, ocean currents, the cryosphere, coral reefs that play a role in the ocean's ability to sink carbon, to sustain biodiversity that's sufficient for that purpose, will be lost, potentially irreversibly, which means that the dependency that countries have developed on the idea of overshoot that can be brought back down by planting enough trees or enriching soil carbon might not be so easy. It's not a one-to-one trade-off. It will be much harder to come down than it was to go up in temperature, in a sense. Now, the implicit timeline is we've got to do this really by 2040. So when we talk about decarbonize by half by 2030, we might as well do the other half in the next decade, where we're going to have big problems. It is a legal mandate, and I think this is the most important insight to take from the COP28. The COP28 recognizes, as all COPs do, the convention mandate to prevent dangerous human-caused interference with the climate system. It also has this ambitious recognition of the need to protect the integrity of all ecosystems, including the cryosphere. Obviously, to achieve this, global heating emissions must cease at the earliest possible date. The economics of that are challenging, but it can be done. And it must be done, or the economics get far more challenging, right? The science also tells us that we will miss the window for what the IPCC calls successful climate resilient development if we don't decarbonize to zero fast enough. They say net zero, but net zero is contingent on the things that allow the net effect to be zero to become real, which at the moment, no one is implementing those things at that rate. Carbon drawdown, including in nature, is not being done at the rate necessary for net zero to be anything other really than zero. Here's the thing. There's a lot of talk about loopholes. There's loophole language in the UAE consensus document. But if we zoom in on what loopholes are, they are gaps in legislation that allow for behavior that contravenes the general spirit of the law. The law here is prevent dangerous climate change. It was agreed in 1992. In the United States, for instance, Article 6 of our Constitution makes that, quote, the supreme law of the land. That agreement to prevent dangerous climate change is higher constitutional law than any federal statute. There's no gap in the law. We have to prevent climate change. The Paris Agreement and the IPCC findings tell us 1.5 is the danger threshold. Now, the language added to the UAE consensus that talks about, transitional fuels and unabated coal and things like that, yet those are caveats, but they're wishful caveats. They don't have any legal weight because they're only relevant if you can meet the actual legal requirement to prevent dangerous climate change. So if we can really get our minds around that fact, then we can start to move into a mindset where politically we can talk to people in government about this reality. Governments are facing lawsuits now challenging them on this. The United States government is being sued by young people who are saying that for decades it has been lying about fossil fuels, knowing that the science was telling them that these were lies, and illegally investing in future destruction. Eventually, that bill is going to come due. So the law is transition. The caveats, the loopholes are just wishes. Now, there were some important voluntary commitments made at the COP28. Focus on food systems and finance for a minute. There was a declaration from heads of state. It now includes 159 parties, plus 2 more countries that signed on to include food systems in their climate action, in adaptation plans, in national decarbonization strategies, in financial arrangements and trade. That's huge. 2 years ago, no countries wanted to sign up to that. Now 161 have signed up to it. There is a non-state actors call to action on food systems and climate. There are hundreds of companies, banks, nonprofit organizations, community groups, intergovernmental agencies signing up to support that food-related climate action. There was a new food finance accelerator called Financing the Future of Food that will issue a series of bonds that will start to bring in some of those blended finance arrangements. $30 billion in green investment created under a new fund by the UAE, the host country, and another 31.6 billion in climate investments from the multilateral development banks. So there's a lot of stuff happening that's outside of the legal findings, the legal decisions. But even if you add up all of those voluntary commitments, none of them are enough if the countries themselves don't get up to speed. They need to take the most ambitious things happening within their borders and among their peers and start to implement them nationally. Finally, I just want to share that on the way to Baku, which is where the COP29 will be held, there are a lot of opportunities to start mobilizing across all of society. The one that we're focused on the most at Citizens Climate International is non-market cooperative arrangements under paragraph 8 of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. If you haven't read it, go read paragraph 8 of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. It talks about international cooperation that doesn't involve emissions trading. It has incredibly high standards and goals. And it basically means everything countries do that is not emissions trading. Banking, agricultural, trade, all sorts of regulatory interventions. And so climate smart trade agreements are now on the table. They're a real thing, they're starting to happen, and they're getting into the routine business of trade negotiations. And then finally, I would just share that at CCI, together with Geoversive and a number of other partners, we've started up something called the Climate Value Exchange, climatevalue.net. I'll post some links in the chat in a minute. And this is an effort to start preparing the way for these multidimensional climate agreements, which would go way too slow if we leave them to annual negotiations. They need to be year-round. They need to be happening from local to global level. And I'll just leave it there. And I know we don't have that much time for discussion, but eager to hear what everyone else has to say.
We've got several questions in the chat. One thing that Joe sort of touched on, but someone was asking, is there a point of no return in greenhouse gas emissions? And if there is, when will we hit it?
Well, I can't speak for, I'm not a climate scientist. On the one hand, there is no point of no return because every increment of warming brings more danger. And if we can get back down from that elevated warming, we can start to restabilize things. But on the other hand, that note from the IPCC is really important. Some things will be lost above 1.5. Whether they come back in our lifetimes or in the next 1,000 years is questionable. They may eventually come back, but it may be long after we're no longer around.
Another question related to what the United States is doing. If you look at that graph that I think Myra showed about what countries plan to do with fossil fuel production, we're going in the wrong direction. The Biden administration has made a lot of progress, done a lot of good things on climate, but we're still planning to expand fossil fuels. What do we do about that? And that's for anyone.
I can respond in brief to that. In particular, there are initiatives to, to really hold on these the permissions being granted, the permits being granted to build coal-fired facilities as well as petrochemical plants. We have to remember everything in the fossil fuel economy includes plastics and petrochemicals. And those are all on the ground wherever we live. We need to be sure that we're pushing back on the issuance of permits. They had begun to go down. There was a decline, but they went back up in 2022. And so we need to stay on top of that in our country, and we need to ask every citizen wherever they are to do the same. So this is where the trend line is going. We're seeing an acceleration of permits being granted, and that's where we can intervene.
That's a super important point, and we do have something coming up to help with that. We're going to be co-sponsoring an action party with Climate Action Now to stop the expansion of liquefied natural gas exports, which is a huge part of what you're seeing in the increase in U.S. fossil fuel production. So we'll be telling you more about that soon. I thought it was a great question. How do we get this presentation in front of Congress? Any ideas?
Well, I think, of course, the Citizens Climate Lobby, which works in the US, the sister organization of CCI, many of you are familiar with it, gets a lot of really good thinking in front of Congress. And the main thing that makes it possible is they're building relationships. So they're not just sending messages or saying things or demanding something. They're talking to people who've learned, I can talk to these people and they'll give me good advice on climate. I think another thing is if you want members of Congress to respond to what it is you want to see, it's really important that they see the connection between what you want and what will be a good outcome for their district or their state. And it really helps if they see that message resonate in local media and in the words and the ideas of local influencers, people in business, people who create jobs, people who have been part of their own political life.
Great. And sort of related to that, we know climate finance is really important. There's a tremendous need for money. And there's a tremendous need for that to come in large part from the United States. But Congress hasn't exactly been lining up to do that. How can we work with Congress to help make that happen?
Well, CCI does work on the finance issue, on international finance reform, and I think that's a really important area. Congress may or may not be interested in international finance reform, and the politics are complicated there. But when the US is able to move money through institutions where it has oversight, like the World Bank, that can make the politics easier, right? The World Bank has the ability to deliver funds in a way that can get good outcomes on the ground and that can be traceable and credible. The problem is that historically, that hasn't always been the case. That hasn't always been the intention. And a lot of times the intention has been to support extractive industries. And so what we would advocate at CCI as our network of stakeholders in 76 countries is involving stakeholders in that climate finance decision-making is really important, because then you can start to see a correlation between the intent that money do good, the desire that it be traceable and be properly managed, and what happens on the other side. Is it a government that might be corrupt and have no intention of using the money appropriately, might even use it to persecute people or just stash it away somewhere? Or is it going to communities where the outcome is actually better? And if that's done in the right way, if the policies that allow that international finance reform to happen are done in the right way, it's going to come back as a return on investment, right? The United States is going to spend less money if the world is less dangerous and unstable. But if we hold back money because we think it's not a good investment, and then the world unravels as a result of our underinvestment in good ideas, that's just not a good bet. And I think put those two things together, the math of pros and cons and the international finance reform with stakeholder involvement, that's really important.
Well, with a broad topic like this and a fabulous panel, we could talk much, much longer. But unfortunately, we're running low on time. I apologize to everybody whose question didn't get answered. But now we have something that is new for us. We're going to have a 15-minute action party with the Climate Action Now app. And we hope you'll stay with us for that. We've curated a number of critical actions for you to take related to the issues that were discussed at COP28 that you just heard about. And we're going to invite Matthew Dallath from Climate Action Now to help us get this party started in just a minute. But first, we wanted to also remind you about the upcoming special 1-hour action party, Stop LNG. That's going to be on Thursday, February 1st at 8 p.m. And we'll put the registration link in the chat. And we hope you'll stay with us for our mini action party and join us for the LNG action party next week. So Matthew, take it away.
Well, great. Thank you, Francis. As you said, let's get this party started. So many of you are familiar with the Climate Action Now app, but if you're not, don't worry. We will take a look together at how we can all take some action tonight based on what we've learned. So let me share my screen here. You should now see on your screen a little pie chart of the Earth and a weird looking little box on the right, which is called a QR code. And that QR code is going to be our magic portal into the actions that we have ready to go to take tonight. So when you're ready, please take out your phone, take out your smartphone, an iPhone or an Android will do just fine, and point it right at the screen here. Take out your phone, point it at the screen. And now you're going to open your camera. Whatever you use to take pictures, your camera app, open that app and point your camera at that QR code box. And when you do that, a little yellow bubble should pop up that says Climate Action Now. Tap right on that, tap right on the yellow bubble, and it will take you to the App Store to download the app or into the app if you already have it. I'll give everybody a second to do that. And please, if the QR code doesn't work for you, I know they can be a little tricky. We have alternate options, so don't let that stop you from taking action. We also have this link on the bottom, as you can see. So an alternate option, if the QR code isn't working for you, you can open your web browser on your phone, your Safari or your Chrome or whatever app on your phone you use to browse the internet, and simply type in that link at the bottom, can.app.link/ capital C, capital O, capital P 28. And hit enter. It'll do the same thing. It'll take you right to the App Store or take you right to the actions in the app. If that doesn't work, let me know in the chat, in the Q&A. I want to get everybody, make sure everybody has a chance to take these actions, so don't let technical difficulties stop you. But fortunately, I can already see a lot of people, it's already working, they're already on, and the numbers are going up. That's what the little globe on the left-hand side is all about. As you guys take action, each action you take is going to add to that counter. And we're trying to get to 1,000 actions in the next 15 minutes. It's ambitious, but I think we can do it. I know we can do it, and we're already doing it. Numbers are already ticking up, so you guys are doing great. Keep up the good work. And once again, if anybody is having any trouble getting on the app, getting to the actions, there are lots of different ways to do it. I promise we can find a way that works for you. So please let me know in the chat, in the Q&A, and I will get you sorted out.
Yeah, so if I could jump in, Matthew, one way that we don't usually show people, but I'd like to do it right now for anybody who's having trouble with the QR codes. I'm gonna see if I can share my, so Jen, if somebody could let me share my screen, I can show people another way to get to the actions that we created for tonight's national call.
Right, you should be able to share your screen now.
Okay. Trying again. Here we go. Yep. All right. And here I'm in the middle of sending a letter to Senator Merkley, my senator here in Oregon. So for those of you who at least can get into the app, but you've struggled with the the QR code, when you're those of you familiar, this is the action carousel. And what a lot of people don't know is that up here, these are the recommended actions, but we also have campaigns. And so if you're in the app and you touch the act button in the lower left, you'll see these two buttons here, and I'm going to touch campaigns. And this opens up a whole new world of action that you can take. And I'm going to look down here for, do you know where we have oh, here it is at the very bottom under other, I guess, because we didn't know where else to categorize this. We have moving forward from COP28. And if you click the little arrow next to that, we give you a description of it. And there's a view campaigns button, or I don't need to click this little button. I can just touch that move forward from COP28. And here you see a list of the actions. So I've already taken a bunch of them. And there's 24 actions, but we have 75 messages that you can send. And this is to state, to federal, to EPA, to some international businesses. Also, I don't know if we have any media organizations, but to Joseph's point about trying to create an ecosystem of influence, if you will, that is something that you'll find elsewhere in the app, lots of messages to media. So here you'll see, okay, so here's one I haven't taken in this campaign. Tell your state leaders, no more fossil fuel development, period. And I'm going to, because the app has my address, it knows who my representative is. Here in Oregon, here's my personalized message. I'm a father who fears for my family in a warming world. And then along with the message, and now I've sent it. And now I'm going to go to my state senator as well. Boom, boom. And then it might even ask me to go to my governor. And so I'm sending a message now, to my governor on this. So that is how you can get to the campaigns from the action carousel, touching on campaigns, scroll to the bottom, and there's, oh, I was in the wrong one. I was at New York. I moved forward on COP28. So I'll stop sharing that. And since I'm hogging the mic here for a minute, I want to say one more thing about the LNG, the Stop LNG Action Party. One key thing to know about this is a big deal. The Action Party panelist is Bill McKibben, who needs no introduction. And Bill is going to be in a conversation with Dr. Robert Howarth of Cornell University. And Dr. Howarth could arguably be the most preeminent, the preeminent scientist on methane. His research on methane has been cited in peer-reviewed research more than anybody else. And he is the guy who raised the recent alarm that the LNG build-out is not really taking into account methane links. And he has done a scientific study showing that without capping the methane, liquid natural gas is as dirty as coal. And Bill McKibben picked up on that research. And when he started talking about it in the New Yorker and in his Substack newsletter. That's what gave us all the inspiration to do this action party. Let's get a conversation going between Bill McKibben and Dr. Howarth, listen to those guys talk, and then we will have hundreds of messages that you can send to various folks, media, political leaders, business leaders, saying, don't do this. Let's not build out this LNG infrastructure. This is so huge, folks. I mean, it dwarfs what we got from the Willow Project, and that had everybody crazy. So this really does need to be stopped. And we've also timed this action party to coincide as closely as possible with an in-person event in Washington, D.C. In fact, we originally wanted to do it February 6th, when that just the night before that action was taking place in DC, but we had to kill that date because Bill McKibben was afraid that he might be arrested that night. So we scheduled it for before he's going to be arrested. He's absolutely expecting to be arrested. So that is February 1st, Bill McKibben, Dr. Howarth. It's going to be an amazing hour. Hopefully we put the link in there, Francis, for the Eventbrite. Check the chat there and sign up. It's going to be an amazing. By the way, this action party is co-sponsored by Elders Climate Action and Climate Action Now. So how are we doing, Matthew? How about an update on our COP28 action party?
We are doing phenomenally. I am so impressed. We are going to blow right past that 1,000 mark and get even higher. I was a little worried. I didn't know if we'd make it to 1,000, but we just did right this minute, and we're going to go even higher. So you guys are doing great. Keep it up.
You guys are doing great. And I just want to say something, and this is sort of mirrored by some of the comments, from the panel tonight. Public opinion is really critical to bringing about this transition, right? Public opinion is the only. The fossil fuel industry has billions, trillions, as we learned, from their development. Folks like us, we don't have any money at all, but we do have our opinions. And public opinion is the only effective counterweight to the massive power of the fossil fuel industry. And the industry knows this, which is why it spends hundreds of millions of dollars on disinformation. And even dictators like Putin know this. Why else do they try to control the media in their countries? Everybody is terrified of public opinion. So when you perhaps say, well, am I sending messages on the app? Is this making any difference whatsoever? Well, if you believe that public opinion makes a difference, and I don't know how you can dispute that, then you expressing your opinion on the app is really essential. You are part of the public. You alone? No, your voice alone makes no difference. But when you send a message on the app, you're adding your voice to thousands or tens of thousands of other voices that are sending their messages at the same time. And in action parties like this, we have made differences. When the CLCPA, New York's signature climate law, was under threat in New York, we did an action party. Bill McKibben moderated, and we sent thousands. We carpet bombed the New York legislature and the governor with messages saying, "Don't do this." 2 days later, the governor backed down. We did 4 action parties on Save the Birds and Bees protection law. Went right down to the wire. Eventually, the governor got the message. She signed the bill. We saw it had similar results in Michigan. We also helped reverse Governor DeSantis's decision to not use IRA funding. We had an action party there. It seems like he got the message, and he's now allowed some of that funding, to go into the state. So it may not seem like you're doing much when you're doing this, but you really are. These messages are really a big deal. I wonder if anybody on the panel can back me up on this. Does anybody else? You guys are professional activists. What do you think about getting citizens to weigh in?
Crucial. And this is where the money is going. If you want to know where profits are being invested, sizable amounts of money go in this area of the narrative, of seizing the narrative. Also, first of all, framing it. And I didn't, you didn't get a chance to kind of hear the nuance in what I was sharing, but there was a framing that was going on of the challenge. And they were already prepared with methodology to meet the challenge and end up where we ended up. And that is a part of training. Corporates go through that kind of training. Harvard is one of the best at putting it out there. Young professionals at the World Bank talk about their training through Harvard of create the crisis and then present the solution. And the narrative around that is how you're persuaded as to what the alarm bell is and how to respond. So we have to be very careful we're not captured by the information that's going out. I applaud California for now demanding that students learn how to see what a deep fake is and to be critical about information they're receiving. I think we all need to have that as a part of our own literacy in our literacy toolkit for navigating these times.
Great, thank you. Anybody else?
I'll back up what Myra said. Some people heard me say earlier that, you know, this is how you actually can reach people, is by making sure that the message comes from more than one person, comes from the community level. But something we often talk about in Citizens Climate when people are feeling doubt and cynicism or just disappointment about politics is, if you are not there, who is? And the more constituents people who serve in public office hear from, the less weight the self-interested have, because their one message is now against hundreds or thousands of people to whom that person swore an oath, and a few $1,000 isn't going to sway that person away from all of those voices. The voices matter.
Politicians, governments, businesses, they're terrified of public opinion, right? Especially in true democracies. But even in the dictatorships, they really do care. But you know, so your opinion matters, but it doesn't count for anything if you don't express it, which is just what Joseph was saying. If you don't show up, nothing's going to happen. That's guaranteed. But if you show up and get your voice stated, and by the way, some of you may have noticed a lot of these actions in the COP28 campaign were recommended by Elders Climate Action. We've got their logo there. I hope you all took notice of that. And I'm now sending a message to Citigroup, telling them to back down, boys. You know, come on, stop doing this stuff you're doing. And every one of these messages, as you know, begins with a personal statement, which you can create in the app. My personal statement is, I'm a father who fears for his family in a warming world. We encourage all of you to create your own personal statement. Make it as personal as possible, because when the staffer in the political office or the customer service person at the company is skimming these messages to see what they're all about, that very first sentence tells them that this is a personal statement. This is not just a boilerplate spam message. Here is a real human being who's worried about his family, right? Who wants to know what you're going to do about it. And so that is, I think, one of the unique features of the app, is that you can make it personal. Every message is personal as it goes out. Well, this is amazing, folks. We were going to go to 1,000 and we're up to 1,300, and we're 15 minutes after the hour. It's your show, Jen, but I'm happy to keep going, but that's on ECA. This is your party.
Yeah, y'all did great. I'm super impressed.
Thank you everybody so much.
We started at like 650, 700. So we basically doubled what we were hoping to get. We were hoping to get another 300 to get to 1,000. We've gotten now to 1,300. So you guys did twice as much as we were hoping for. So you guys are great. Keep going. Keep it up.
That's amazing. I'm very proud of the Forest Service letter I just sent to Randy Moore to protect the forest. Thank you.
And thank you so much for everyone who stayed with us and has been sending actions. And thank you to the panelists. You all were terrific. And we could probably do this all night, but we do wrap this up. Now the actions are still available on the app, so you can keep going on the app as long as you want, or come back to them tomorrow.
New actions every day.
Yes.
We're always loading it up with new ones. So
thanks again, and we hope we'll see you at the LNG Action Party. Oh, and yes, and before that, we also have a Get Out the Vote Action Party on January, is it 31st, Matthew?
January 30th. And
30th.
let me put that. Do you have that handy? If you don't have that handy, I can put the link in.
And this will all be in, you'll get the recording of this call, and you'll also get all the great links that Susannah and other people have been putting in the chat. And the links for the action parties, all that information you'll get probably tomorrow. So certainly the app is an amazing way to make your voice heard, but there's nothing that's a substitute for voting. And this is a very important year. So we're going to be having a lot of focus on all of us voting and getting other people who really care about climate and the environment and about all the people living in our world to vote in November and before. Primaries are important too.
And we'll
So
be doing these action parties all year long with our national calls. So make sure you come every month and we'll make sure you have 15 minutes of actions to take each month. Everybody have a really great evening and good night.
Good night. Thank you all.
Thank you.